the profound meaning behind God's words, I am who I am. What if the most powerful answer God ever gave was only 3 words, not a strategy, not an explanation, not a detailed plan, just this, I am who I am. When Moses stood before a bush that burned without being consumed, he wasn't asking for poetry, he was asking for certainty. Who should I say sent me? And God didn't give him a resume, he gave him his being, I am. Not I was, not I will try to be, I am. In a world where everything shifts, jobs collapse, relationships fracture, identities blur, God introduces himself as the one who simply is, self-existent, unchanging, present. And that changes everything, because before you figure out who you are, you need to know who he is. Let me ask you something specific. What does it mean for you, right now, if God says, who I am, but you feel like you don't even know who you are anymore after losing your job, your relationship, or the version of life you thought you'd have by now? Maybe you built your identity around being the dependable employee, the strong parent, the successful entrepreneur, the faithful spouse, and then something shifted. The company downsized, the marriage ended, the dreams stalled, and suddenly the question isn't just what happened, it's who am I now? When Moses asked God for his name, he wasn't asking out of idle curiosity. He had failed once already. He had tried to deliver Israel in his own strength 40 years earlier, and it ended in exile. Now he's a shepherd in Midian, far removed from Egyptian royalty. He's in between identities, no longer prince, not yet prophet, and in that fragile space God reveals himself as I am. Here's the insight. God anchors Moses in divine identity before assigning him divine mission. The revelation of who God is comes before the command of what Moses must do. That order matters. We often reverse it. We think if we can figure out what to do, we'll rediscover who we are. But Scripture shows us something deeper. Stability doesn't come from your role. It comes from God's unchanging nature. I once spoke with a man who had worked at the same manufacturing company for 22 years. He was known as the reliable one, the first to arrive, the last to leave. Then automation replaced his position. He told me, I didn't just lose a paycheck, I lost myself. But over time, through prayer and scripture, he began to see something. His worth had never truly been in his position. It had been in belonging to the God who says, I am. His calling shifted. He started mentoring younger men in his church, sharing about perseverance and faithfulness. His title changed. His identity didn't. When God says I am, he's declaring that his existence does not depend on circumstances. And if your life is rooted in him, your core identity doesn't collapse when circumstances do. You may be in a season where everything feels undefined, but here is your anchor. The one who defines reality has not changed. He is not scrambling to adjust. He is not reinventing himself. He is constant. And because he is constant, you are not lost, even when your labels fall away. Before you figure out your next move, ground yourself in who he is. Let his stability speak louder than your confusion. Let his being quiet your becoming. Because when you don't know who you are, start with who he is. But let's be honest, standing before a holy, self-existent God can feel intimidating. When Moses approached the bush, God told him to remove his sandals. That wasn't just ritual, that was vulnerability. Bare feet on desert ground. No barrier, no protection. It was an invitation to stand exposed before holiness. And many of us know that feeling. You hear, I am who I am, and instead of comfort, you feel small. You think, if God is that eternal, that unchanging, that sovereign, where does that leave me? Fragile, limited, inconsistent. Maybe you struggle with imposter syndrome in your career. Maybe you wrestle with private doubts in your faith. Maybe you fear that your weaknesses disqualify you from being used by God. Moses did. He immediately responded with objections. Who am I? What if they don't believe me? I'm not eloquent. There's a gentle tension here. Some people hear I am who I am and think it sounds distant, almost evasive, as if God is saying, that's all you get, no explanation. But in the ancient world, names carried weight. They expressed character and authority. When God reveals his name, he isn't hiding. He is declaring that he cannot be reduced to a tribal deity or a manageable concept. He is infinite presence. And here's something beautiful. God reveals this name not to a king, not to a scholar, not to a religious elite, but to a shepherd in exile, a man who once committed murder, a man who ran. The command to remove sandals symbolizes surrendering self-made identity. Moses had worn the sandals of an Egyptian prince, then the sandals of a Midianite shepherd. But before the Holy One, every constructed identity comes off. That can feel uncomfortable, because we cling to titles, we cling to achievements, we cling to failures even. They feel solid. But God invites us into something deeper than self-definition. He invites us to stand on holy ground and let Him define reality. You are not alone in your hesitation. Faith is not the absence of trembling. It is obedience in the presence of it. The same God who says I am is also the God who says, I will be with you. His eternal nature does not crush your fragility, it surrounds it. So if you feel small, uncertain, or exposed, you're in the right place. Moses was too, and it was there, barefoot, uncertain, that he encountered the one who simply is. Let's slow down and look carefully at Exodus 3:14. God said to Moses, I am who I am, and he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. In Hebrew, the phrase is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. It comes from the verb haya, which means to be, but it is not locked into a single tense the way English often is. It can carry the sense of I am, but also I will be. In other words, God is not only declaring self-existence, He's declaring ongoing, active presence. This wasn't abstract philosophy. Israel had been enslaved for generations, surrounded by Egyptian gods tied to the Nile, the sun, fertility and territory. They lived in a world where every deity had a domain. But when Moses asks for God's name, the Lord does not associate Himself with a river, a mountain or a function. He reveals Himself as being itself, not confined, not localized, not dependent. That alone would have shaken the ancient world. Pharaoh himself was considered divine. His authority rested on the claim that he embodied ultimate power. But when Moses walks into Egypt saying, I am has sent me, it is more than a message. It is a confrontation. The self-existent God stands in direct opposition to every human claim to ultimate authority. Here's a deeper insight. I am is both promise and protest. It is promise to Israel, I will be with you, I am present in your suffering, and it is protest against oppression. No ruler, no empire, no system defines reality. I do. And notice something else. God does not say, I was who I was. He does not anchor His authority in nostalgia, nor does He say, I will become who I decide to become, as if He is evolving. He simply is, unchanging, self-sustaining, eternal. Theologians use the word eicity to describe this. God exists from Himself. He is not powered by anything outside of Himself. He does not derive life. He is life. But this revelation is not meant to intimidate. It is meant to assure. For a people who had known only instability, this name declared that their hope did not depend on fluctuating circumstances. Their God was not reacting. He was initiating. And the story does not end in Exodus. When Jesus later says in the Gospel of John, before Abraham was, I am, He is not choosing His words casually. He is echoing the divine name. The same eternal presence revealed in the wilderness is now walking in flesh. So when you read Exodus 3:14, you are not reading a distant theological statement. You are encountering the foundation of reality itself. The God who speaks from the bush is not bound by time, culture, or your current crisis. He is the one who was, who is, and who will be, active, faithful, uncontained. And if that is who He is, then the question becomes personal. How do we live in light of that kind of God? If God is I am, then your life cannot be built on what fluctuates. It must be built on what endures. First, anchor your identity in God's character, not your performance. We live in a culture obsessed with self-definition. Express yourself. Reinvent yourself. Be whoever you want to be. But Scripture offers something steadier. Instead of endlessly constructing identity, we align ourselves with the one whose identity never shifts. Stability does not come from self-creation. It comes from rootedness in divine constancy. That means when you succeed, you don't become inflated. When you fail, you don't become erased. Your core is not tied to outcomes, it is tied to belonging. Second, trust God's ongoing presence. Remember the nuance of Ehyeh, I will be. God was not just telling Moses, I exist. He was assuring him, I will be with you as events unfold. That matters. Because most of our anxiety is future-focused. What if this happens? What if I can't handle that? God's name speaks into that fear. He does not promise a fully mapped path. He promises himself in the path. I know a missionary family who once faced a season where their financial support dropped unexpectedly. They had children, responsibilities, uncertainty. They prayed, but nothing dramatic happened overnight. Instead, provision came step by step. A church here, an unexpected gift there, temporary work that filled gaps. Looking back, they said, we never had surplus, but we never lacked. That is, I will be in action, not flashy, faithful. Third, resist the urge to shrink God into a formula. It's tempting to treat God like a predictable system. Pray the right words, follow the right steps, and everything should align. But the name I am reminds us that God cannot be reduced to technique. He is relational, not mechanical. Develop practices that keep you attentive to his presence, prayer that listens as much as it speaks, scripture meditation that shapes your thinking, silence that cultivates reverence. Not to control him, but to know him. Fourth, embrace holy mystery. Some argue that if God cannot be fully understood, then he must be distant. But mystery does not equal absence. It signals depth. You do not exhaust the ocean by standing on the shore. You enter it gradually. Faith is not mastering God intellectually. It is trusting him personally. And here is the tension resolved. God is incomprehensible in essence, yet intimately involved in relationship. The one who simply is also says, I will be with you. Transcendent and near. Finally, walk in obedience even when you still feel inadequate. Moses did not leave the bush fully confident in himself. He left confident in God. There's a difference. You may never feel entirely ready for what God calls you to do, but readiness is not the requirement. Reliance is. Because when the eternal I am stands behind your obedience, your limitations do not have the final word. Live each day aware that you are grounded in the unchanging one. Let his constancy calm your fear. Let his presence steady your steps. And when the future feels uncertain, remember, the one who sends you does not evolve, does not weaken, does not disappear. He is, and he will be. But we need to be careful here. There is a subtle and very modern misapplication of I am who I am. Sometimes people borrow God's words to justify their own self-assertion. We hear phrases like, that's just who I am, as a defense for impatience, pride, or unwillingness to grow, as if immutability were a human virtue. But when God says, I am who I am, he is not endorsing stubbornness, he is declaring perfection. His unchanging nature includes absolute holiness, justice, mercy, and truth. He does not evolve because he lacks nothing. We, on the other hand, must change precisely because we lack much. There is a vast difference between divine constancy and human rigidity. Another distortion appears in prosperity-centered thinking. Some interpret God's self-existence as a guarantee of uninterrupted comfort. If the great I am is with me, nothing hard should happen. But that's not what Moses experienced. The revelation at the bush did not remove resistance, it intensified it. Pharaoh pushed back, the people complained, the journey was long. God's name is not a promise of ease, it is a promise of presence. We must also guard against reducing I am to a motivational slogan. It is not meant to inflate our ego, it is meant to humble us. Moses removed his sandals before he received his commission. Reverence preceded action. Confidence in God should never become arrogance in ourselves. So when you stand on the truth that God is unchanging, let it produce steadiness, not self-importance. Let it produce trust, not entitlement. Let it produce obedience, not control. The holy name is not a tool to bend reality to our will. It is a revelation that calls us to bend our will to his. So here we are, The God who spoke from the fire still speaks through his word. The one who declared I am has not faded with history. He's not a relic of ancient deserts. He is the foundation beneath your present moment. Because he is, you do not have to be ruled by what feels unstable. Because he is, your future is not floating in uncertainty. Because he is, your identity does not collapse when circumstances do. Every season of confusion can become holy ground when lived before the Eternal One. Maybe today you need to stop striving to define yourself and instead rest in the one who defines all things. Maybe you need to surrender the sandals of achievement, comparison, or fear. Maybe you need to trust that I will be applies to your unfolding story just as much as it did to Moses's. Take time to reflect. Where have you been building on shifting sand? Where do you need to remember that God's character, not your performance, is your anchor? Lean into Scripture, pray honestly, surround yourself with believers who remind you of what does not change. Let your life be shaped not by panic, but by presence. And as you walk forward, may the great I Am steady your heart when anxiety rises. May his unchanging nature calm your restless thoughts. May his faithful presence guide your decisions. And may you live each day grounded in this unshakable truth. He is, and he will be,